So John, I thought we'd start kind of giving context about how you and I met. I was a student at the University of Toronto, and I actually never took one of your classes, but I was a student in your meditation sessions that you had on lunch break, which was great. And about maybe a year ago, you came on my podcast, Intellectual Explorers podcast.
Yeah.
And then when we had follow-up breakfast, I'm mentioning to you these different conversational modalities that I've been experiencing and engaging in, like verbal aikido, circling, what is it, like insight dialogue, stuff like that. And then you got captured by that sort of conversation. And then we decided to go on a research project together. Kind of not only just reading the primary material, but actually engaging in the practices themselves. So I'm just kind of curious, what is your sort of thoughts on this journey so far that you and I have been going on?
So there was two things. There was a criticism that Jonathan Pajot had made of my work, a very good criticism. You know, that it was for all of my criticism of autodidactism, I wasn't talking very much about, collective psychotechnologies. Right. And so shortly after Jonathan made, and, Jonathan's criticisms are always made in good faith. Shortly after he made that criticism, you and I spoke, and that's why I was sort of like, And then as I got into doing the work with you and started reading some of the literature and starting to do some of the practices with you, this was starting to gel with ideas that were emerging in a conversation I was having. Initially, and importantly, because it was very provocative, was a conversation I was having with Jordan Hall. And I was trying to understand his notion of coherence. And then he proposed the idea of a metapsychotechnology. I was thinking that the metapsychotechnology in the ancient world was dialectic, which and it has all these and I knew it had all these dimensions to it. And then I thought, so first of all, Jordan's idea hit me like that. Wow, yeah, that's right. And there's a relationship between the metapsychotechnology for collective intelligence and the metaheuristic for individual wisdom cultivation, and that was all. The relationship between those was integral to dialectic, and so that sort of really grabbed me. And I thought, what I want to do after awakening from the meaning crisis is I want to start developing a series that explores that, because I thought, well, what we could do is let's really understand that very deeply, and then bring it into dialogue with all of these emerging modalities. And see if we could, create what Jordan says we need, which is the metapsychotechnology that would coordinate with the metaheuristic of wisdom. And then, of course, the people at Rebel Wisdom start taking up this idea, about collective intelligence and how important it is. And so I just feel like I don't have any beliefs about destiny or a telos or anything, but it's like everything is just sort of really folding together in this sort of mutually affording fashion. And at the same time, I'm starting to participate in more and more of these kinds of conversations with Jordan and with Guy. Personally, for me, it's expanding in terms of what's it mean for me and my own personal ecology of practices. I'm trying to see how does it work with things like Lectio Divina, how does it work with the contemplative practices, how does it work with the moving practices? Because, a lot of these modalities bring in embodiment, bring in mindfulness, bring in a new way of trying to even relate to language. So it's just been, I feel really, really privileged. And again, the timing for me is I'm on sabbatical, so I could just go crazy on this. It's just been wonderful, just wonderful.
And one thing, I just want to send you gratitude and love your way. Because, Dave and I were talking about the intellectual dark web and how some of that dialogue there just seems fossilized. People are kind of attached to their viewpoints. But seeing you dialogue with Jordan Hall or Guy or in the in-person Intellectual Explorers Club, I see your insights in the moment and just those aha moments that you have. And I almost see you rewriting your map live.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm curious, why do you think that is for you?
That's a really good question. Part of it is, these are different aspects of the figure of Socrates and the practice that he had. So it's very, a Socratic dialogue often doesn't end in an argumentative conclusion. Instead, what's often happened is, aporia, a kind of profound insight that challenges people to change, to enter into an aspirational project of transformation. So, from the very beginning, I was interested in the connection between inference and insight. And so I developed my teaching style and my way of doing scientific theorizing, in which I really tried to integrate both insight and inference together. And then as I developed mindfulness skills, brought those to bear. And so I very much, I very much try to get into something, and I think it often is, into a flow state when I'm teaching, and then that is often best afforded if there's a more dialogic relationship with my students, and then that got taken up into, and it's being developed in these dialogues I'm having with people. And so that's really important to me, and thank you for what you just said, because there's sort of a model that's emerging in my mind, and it goes to an argument that I've already been presenting in the series about the difference between intelligence and rationality, and that the way you get rationality is by having intelligence to sort of recursively applied to itself and improve its own application. And one of the hallmarks of rationality is to care about the process as much, and at times more, than the product, right? It's the opposite of bottom line thinking, right? And so what I'm starting to see is that, and it's very good that we're starting to create psychotech and practices for, coalescing and accentuating collective intelligence, but we need to bring in the psychotech that gets that collective intelligence into what I would call collective rationality. Again, I don't mean, rationality doesn't mean logicality, etc. I mean, it's a much more comprehensive notion. Right. So moments of insight are often very much about that. When I see, right, where there's been like sort of this going on, dialogue, and then there's an insight, and it's like a problem reformulation, right? Because you're not, see, the key to insight isn't, what happens in insight is you're reformulating the problem. You're paying much more attention to how the problem is formulated before you're going for the answer. And so insight is when the dialogue is going through something like a restructuring or reformulation, and then there's this awareness of the process, and that's an opportunity to intervene for the sake of cultivating the collective intelligence into collective rationality. Although, I'm working hard to try and open the notion of rationality up to be much more comprehensive. But I sometimes I now use the word like collective wisdom, because that's the sense of rationality I'm trying to point towards. So insight for me is both personally optimizing. I'm moving into something like the flow state, but it's also like, and it's tapping into the sage I've internalized, Socrates. But it's also pointing forward to like how are we going to relate to and inhabit the space of collective intelligence and reshape it so that we can start to enact collective wisdom and do what you see in the Platonic dialogues. Turn that wisdom on central and important topics and issues that concern human beings.
Right. And something that you said that struck me is that you said the bottom line thinking. And, it seems like what's neutered is the opportunity for us to gain insight in an intersubjective dynamic. And I wanted to talk to you about like I-it relating with Mark Verbuten's term. Like for myself, I work at Dale Carnegie Training. I'm an instructor there, so I teach interpersonal skills. And when I was younger, I had massive anxiety, social anxiety. So I kind of like did everything, acting classes, improv classes, Toastmaster.
I understand.
And I discovered a lot of these kind of like intersubjective modalities that were more I-it, like sales, negotiation, even like pickup artistry. And it seems like in the professional environment, which is sort of like what they say, game A lot of people are having these I-it relationships with each other. And it's like, I'm instrumentalizing you to get something. So I'm treating you as an instrument. And I like this term by C. Wright Mills, I think, the marketing mentality. It's not only am I making you an instrument, I'm making myself an instrument so I can be easily used by you. And there's a sense like people wearing a mask. There's this existential loneliness, a hunger for something more, and there's this prevalence of bullshit as an art form now. So I was wondering if you can speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, and Fromm actually also talked about the market personality.
Right.
So yeah, a convergence of ideas here. Yeah, I mean, so if you look at the I-it, or what Fromm would call the having mode, the categorical representation, manipulation, control, it's oriented around problem solving, right? And this is something I think we should. I'm going to make a point that I think we should start refining our discourse about this practice. So I'm going to make a proposal to you. I often hear people talking about the kind of practices we're doing as being sort of motivated by curiosity. And I propose that we shouldn't be using that. I propose that we should be thinking about wonder a lot more. And this is important because Socrates famously said that wisdom begins in wonder. Because wonder is a state where what you're doing is you're opening up a space so that you're confronting mystery. You're calling into question yourself and your world, so that they both can undergo the restructuring that you and I were talking about a moment ago. And wonder can be deepened into awe, which is a powerful, has a powerful ability to pull people beyond their egocentrism. That's one of the features of awe is it takes people out of egocentrism. They feel humbled, right? They get a sense of, I don't mean this pejoratively, but being put in their place, and that their worldview, their world and their self is too small for the reality that they've confronted. And I see what was happening in Plato is, you're trying to deepen wonder into awe and get that going. And that's what I feel is happening when I'm doing these modalities, right? Whereas it's not curiosity. I know what curiosity is like. Here's a gap in the knowledge, and I run an experiment and I try and close it, and that's important. It's how you deal with ignorance. But we're not trying to solve problems here. We're trying to, I think, invoke our participation in wonder, so that we actually platform people going through a transformative process. And so I think we should, in order to break out of the I-it and get into I-thou, we need to pay much more careful attention to the terms and the states that we're trying to inhabit. I think becoming more familiar with participatory knowing of wonder is a way of moving into an I-thou relationship, where I'm trying to confront that space in which restructuring of identity, both my identity and the identities in the world, is possible, so that I can fulfill the developmental needs that are central to the being mode. And so I think that's an important thing. We need to start, I mean, that's part of why you and I are doing what we're doing. We need to get more careful language and more careful thought, because I think we should start thinking about moving beyond the inception stage and the promotion stage of these modalities to, as I said, can we start to integrate them with good cognitive science and move them in a particular direction.
There's this term that came up, just like there's this wonderphobia in society at large, it seems like. And you and I were talking about like experimenting with these modalities, and even like maybe experimenting, creating new ones. And there's a sense that there might be needs to be bridges that we have to build, like the anti-debates that we're experimenting here at the Intellectual Explorers Club.
Sure.
Do you have any intuitions about how to go about that?
I think one of the intuitions is to get people to realize that it is possible to enter into, see, the words are so loaded, but to enter into argumentation without entering into, if you'll allow me this, without entering into dispute. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is like getting people to understand the difference between opponent processing and adversarial processing, right? And so Plato had a term for this. There's philia sophia, which is we come together and we each recognize we have bias. And then I realized that one of the things your bias is actually really good for is pulling me out of mine, and vice versa. And so we can fit together, we can do that opponent processing and create a logos that has us doing something we can't do for ourselves. because our biases are trapping us and making us stuck. But if we coordinate them in the right way, we can actually call each other beyond our biases, right? And so that's opponent processing, and that's a real possibility for people in contrast to the mentality of adversarial processing. You know, what Plato called philia Nikeia, the love of victory, so it's an adversarial winner take all, crush the opponent, because that attitude actually, right, removes the possibility that is you. I think that possibility is very much dependent on a kind of opponent processing, the possibility of self-correction. Again, if people can start to move to that idea that they can be, right, they can be in opponent processing without being adversaries. And so I think that's a very important thing. That's a very important bridge. Now, what that looks like in terms of a specific practice, I don't know yet. I see it happening in individual conversations and dialogue, and it often happens around when people will bring this topic up for me. They'll bring it up, and then you can see that they get it, and they shift because they want to try. They at least want to try it, and I found it very powerful a lot of those times. So I think that's an important thing that we have to start bringing into it. And if we could get people to realize again, this sounds so trite, right? But if we could get people to realize again how much we need each other in this, as opposed to needing to be right, that could be a beneficial bridge.
Right. It's like there is a sense that of debate fatigue, I'm noticing. And there's this term I quite like by Scott Akins and Robert Talese called the dialectic fallacy, where there's like this gesturing that we're here to have a good faith conversation, but really we're just trying to score points with our tribe.
Yeah.
Right? We're just trying to win type of thing. And there's incentives for why that is, of course. But I think there's an area to be playful here, and then this idea of the anti-debate, where you sort of have this kind of like confrontational aspect about it, but you're gamifying understanding to give people a taste of sort of like an I-thou way of relating.
Well, yeah, and I think the I-thou relating, right, and bringing in rationality, as I would describe it, is about, can we get people, if we get them to understand opponent processing, can we get them back to valuing the process for its own sake? So I've adopted some practices I do. I try to, okay, how do I know if I'm really listening? I know if I'm really listening if another person triggers an insight in me. Mm-hmm. So it's a marker for me. If I can go, oh, wow, ooh, restructuring, and that didn't originate with me. So I look for that, and I try to sensitize myself for it. And I try to sort of, as much as I can, set things up so people will feel free to sort of be more playful and possibly afford an insight. Mm-hmm. So I do something like that. Also, I try to see, and of course not insincerely, but where I can step back and exemplify self-correction and say, oh, that was a mistake or that was imprecise, and where I'm not trying to, again, do some sneaky sly thing so I can then trap you into the conclusion I want you to come to, but because it's like, oh, right, what I ultimately want for this is to engage in this kind of self-correction, this self-organizing self-correction. Now, you have to be sensitive to where you're interacting. Like there's certain arenas where that confrontation has to be more combative. I mean, like, so when you're in the scientific arena, like, you have to come to conclusions because for reasons of funding and publication and blah 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 blah, and that, and so you have to accept that. But if we're not so much pursuing knowledge, if you allow me this distinction, but cultivating wisdom, I think we can shift over to trying to, and I'm not saying that what I just proposed to you is exhaustive. This is stuff I'm just working out right now. But can we give people a list of things that they can pay attention to, that are markers, that they're oriented to the process, and they're in opponent processing rather than adversarial combat?
So can you explain what opponent processing means?
Yeah. So let me give you an example from your own nervous system and the way it connects you to the world and helps you cope and care about the world. So this is your autonomic. Notice it's self-governing. That's what autonomous means. Your autonomic nervous system. This is this part of your system that is responsible for regulating your level of arousal, not your sexual arousal, your level of arousal. How much metabolic energy are you expending right now? And the point is, there's no algorithm for that, because sometimes you need to be really, sometimes, and you can't be Canadian, like just sort of middling all the time or anything like that. So, well, this is just an example. You can see this in multiple scales throughout biology, within your own physiology. But let's do it with the autonomic nervous system. So what you have is it's divided into two subsystems. There's the sympathetic system, and what it does is it's biased. It's biased. It's trying to interpret as much of the environment as it can, as many stimuli as it can, as indicating that arousal should be raised. The parasympathetic system is the opposite. It's trying to interpret as much of the environment as it can. It has an opposite bias as, no, arousal should be diminished. And then, so they're working sort of opposite to each other. They have opposite biases, but they're conjoined together causally. So as the sympathetic system tries to ramp up, it tries to shut down, right? It tries to downregulate the parasympathetic and vice versa. So what you got is this constantly dynamic, moment by moment, fine-grained, self-organized recalibration of, right, the best interpretation of the environment and the most appropriate level of arousal that you should have coupled. And it's coupled together. And so that's opponent processing. It would be insane if if the sympathetic nervous system, no, my view is right, and what I have to do is kill the parasympathetic, you would then die. And the capacity for self-correction and dynamically and fluidly recalibrating on the fly your level of arousal would be lost. I was in a conversation this morning, and one of the people said, oh yeah, that would be like cancer, like where one set of cells is now, I'm going to win at all costs, and has stepped outside of opponent processing into adversarial. So if we could mimic that, right, interpersonally, what's happening intrapersonally, that's what I mean by opponent processing.
So you and I are sort of doing circling together on a regular basis. We're not just researching, we're practicing it.
Participant observation, hopefully getting an ethnography out of it. Right. And like our last circling, I've had like insights, and it was powerful and was interesting because there's both insights within. So there's constitutive insights that are inside. I've argued elsewhere with Leo Ferraro and Adrian Heron-Bennett that flow is a sort of an insight cascade. And I've mentioned to Guy this, that I think what's happening in circling is you're trying to get a flow state going in distributed cognition. And so you get constitutive insights. These are insights that sort of prompt the circling and keep it going. And then there's these meta insights where you step back, right? Like we do when we're checking out or reflecting at the end, and you get insights about the process itself. You understand the difference here between the constitutive insights that generate the flow and then the meta insights where you sort of take away and go, oh, I have an insight about what's going on there. And in our last circling, I had both of those in a very powerful degree.
So just for people who have no idea what circling is, I know David has interviewed Guy and you can watch videos on it. Right, totally. It's really hard to describe like an elevator pitch, but what would you say to circling is for someone who is not really aware of it?
Well, people often use mindfulness, but I think they use a meditative analogy, which I think isn't as good. So let me try an analogy here, because often if you give people an analogy and then you can specify it into more technical terms. So I'm a Tai Chi Chuan player, serious play, right? And you're always trying to get this bi-directional awareness going. They talk about like having two eyes. So one is an awareness that's going deep into your body and into your mind, not into your thoughts, but sort of tasting your mind. What's its temperature and texture and tempo. So you've got this inner eye, and then you've got an outer eye looking out at the environment. And then the way your left and right visual fields do stereoscopic fusion, so you get depth perception? What you learn to do in Tai Chi is, initially you're doing both of these and you're moving back and forth, but eventually you get that stereoscopic fusion. The inner and the outer, right, fuse together. And so that's part of how you cultivate Qi, right? And what you get then is this way in which you get very coupled simultaneously to your embodiment and then to the environment. And then, of course, you move. And what you're trying to do with the movements is you're trying to create flow, because the point of the movements is they yin and yang, they expand and contract, and your attention is expanding and contracting, and right. And so all of this is very powerful technology to try and get you into a flow state. And now I think the same thing's happening in circling, but instead of the movements being movements of body, they're largely movements of discourse. So what's happening is, to get into circling, you're bringing this inner awareness, a kind of mindfulness, but you're trying to get it fused in this dynamic sense with an outer awareness of what's going on in other people, and then you're trying to make movements that get that into a collective flow state. So what happens often in circling is people, they're doing a thing where you can see that they're trying to, they'll give a little bit more attention to, right, what's going on inside, and then a little bit more out, and then they also do the zoom out. What's the whole group? What's the individual? And so I find it very analogous to the practice of Tai Chi, because you got the zooming out, the zooming in, and then you've got the attempt to fuse the outer awareness and the inner awareness, so they're mutually affording each other. And then this is all being coordinated, so you're getting something like a collective flow state that accesses and I think accentuates the power of distributed cognition. It engenders collective intelligence right there.
And to ground it for people who might not have experienced it before, sometimes it's called an intersubjective meditative practice, and you get in a circle, an actual circle, and then you have these sort of conversational kind of experiences, and they have these neat little warm-up exercises that we do beforehand, right? One of them I quite like is called the imagination game, and so we're just kind of sitting across from each other, and then I'm imagining something about your reality right now, whether what you're feeling or what you're thinking, and then I state it, and then you confirm if that's true or false. And then you do it to me. And then if you do this back and forth, your intuition muscles gets quite strong.
Yeah. You build up what Siegel called mindsight, and I built a little bit on that, on the idea of mindsight resonance. So mindsight is your ability to pick up on other people's mental states. And so what human beings do is, and we're doing it now, so I start to pick up on your mental state, and then you start to give me cues, often embodied cues like the nod, or as I pick up on you, give me cues to help me pick up more on you. And then what I then do is I tailor myself to allow you to pick up more on me. And so what starts to happen is I read you, and then that helps me better present myself so you can read me better, and then you're reading me, and then you present, and then we resonate. And so a lot of what's happening with a lot of the warm-up exercises for circling is we're trying to create mindsight resonance.
Right. And
because if I know your mental state, it's right, I'm much more successful at restructuring my communication so you'll get me. And then vice versa, we loop.
Right. And there's like you're saying, there's so much insights that are flowing in these sessions that we're having, and then you're dropping some amazing bombs. One of them that happened the last session, you had to play on words of peer. Right? So if you're someone's peer, you have the capacity to peer through them, but you're also allowing them to peer through you.
Yes, and so that play. So that's the playfulness that you're. So that was one of the it was like a constitutive, that really helped me stay in the flow. I also that very same time I had that what I would call a meta insight, because I was coming to the realization. I had the experience that when you're in circling, people, like, you get that salience glow that you're in the flow state, or when people are in psychedelic experience, right? And so I asked other people, was that the case? And you were there, and other people were saying, yeah. And then there was a report that this is often reported. And I thought, okay, well, I know what psilocybin's doing on the brain. It's getting areas of the brain to talk to each other that don't normally talk to each other. And there's all the hyperscanning synchrony studies. When people are doing this interpersonal stuff, the brain they start synchronizing in important ways. So I'm not claiming this is the case, but this is a really interesting hypothesis to explore. That what's happening is circling gets the interpersonal patterns of connection to be novel and restructured, and we're communicating in ways we don't normally do, and then that gets internalized as areas of the brain talking and communicating to each other in ways they don't normally do. And then that feeds back out to help the restructuring of the interpersonal, and then that feeds back in to help the restructuring of the and then you get that loop going. And if you've already got a mind-site resonance going, you could see why that would loop so powerfully.
Right. And like, what comes to mind is this circling in particular. It's like a gym to practice truthfulness. And Daniel Schmachenberger had this interesting distinction between, truth versus truthfulness, where truth is like the correspondence theory of truth. Your map of reality accurately maps over to reality. So it's like you arrived in a way. Where truthfulness is that process, the ongoing process of mapping. And
one's a property and the other's an ideal.
Right. And then this mapping process, it localizes it in circling to the immediate moment, or your felt senses, your thoughts and whatnot.
So I think that's very good. I mean, but one of the things I would like, I suppose, for our project, I don't want to mess with circling. It is what it is, and it has the values it does, and I want to continue practicing it. But it would be nice if we could bring, so in Tai Chi, if all I'm ever doing is sort of reflecting on my, right, then I can't actually ever, I couldn't ever spar, right? I couldn't actually ever use it in self-defense. There has to be, what I'm trying to say is, yes, we get all this coordination going and we come into the present moment, but you have to be able to come into the present moment so you can do something there other than find another present moment. That's what so if you'll allow me to play a little bit more with the Tai Chi metaphor, and this is what I see happening in Socratic dialogue. You have all this stuff going. Socrates will say, do you believe that right now, or did you just hear somebody say that? If you just heard somebody say it, don't say it. Tell me what you're feeling or believing right now. Be participatory. So Socrates is doing that, but he's not doing it just to keep people in the present moment. He's keeping them in the present moment and getting this loop that we're talking about going, so then they can then turn. It's like I feel sometimes, it's a worry. We're building this powerful machine, and then we're just saying, look at how beautifully it runs. Look at how let's oil it some more. So it's running better and better. And you have to do that. You have to care. But what do we want to do with this? What I want to do with this, right? And is it would be nice, like I say, if we could use it. If we could bootstrap collective intelligence up into collective rationality, and then we could turn that powerful, self-correcting, insightful machine, if you allow me this analogy, onto issues like what is wisdom, what is a good life, what is meaning, like the things that we need to have good discussions about right now, because all of these things have fallen into impoverishment, and that's one of the things driving the meaning crisis. But we could revitalize them in really powerful ways.
And so you and I have sort of a to-do list of all these modalities to check out, right? So we're engaging in circling right now. We have something of insight dialogue. We have empathy circles, restorative circles by Dominic Barter. And my read is that all of these are deliciously incomplete.
Yes.
And we're getting a taste of them, but they're hyper-focused on one thing. One's on empathy, one's on connecting.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this in the last time you came to the Intellectual Explorers Club, is that like a call to arms for like philosophers and scientists, but also artists and entrepreneurs to kind of play with this and see if we can discover something new.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and again, not to hammer on this point, but that's exactly also what you see in the Socratic, right, dialogues. Socrates, he'll talk to philosophers, he'll talk to Parmenides, but he also talks to generals, he talks to everybody. Well, I think these issues, in one sense, are philosophically profound. I think they are philosophically profound, not in the sense of academic conceptual clarification or argumentation. I think they're philosophically profound in the ancient sense, in which they concern trying to get an understanding, right, an understanding and a self-knowledge that can really help people aspire, as I said, to wisdom and to enhancing meaning in life. And I think, if it's going to be effective, it has to, like what Socrates does, it has to be able to reach everybody who wants to be less self-deceptive, more connected. And this is a Platonic conceit on my part. I think that deep down everybody does want that. And so, yeah, I think very much we've got to engineer this and reverse engineer this so it can do exactly that. That we can say, look, we need this term is so. So our terms, like, this is what we need. So many of our terms have been emptied and rendered thin. Right. But we need a kind of, cognitive diversity so that we can enrich the ecology of practices as much as possible, so that the evolution of the abilities that we're seeking are optimally afforded. That's what we need. We need a lot of people involved.
Right. And it's like, it's not just you and I doing this. I just want to send out an invitation, use this conversation as an opportunity. Yes. Just everyone who feels resonant about this kind of adventure that you and I are on, who want to join, come on, let's experiment.
Yes, I think so. As long as people bring with it this attitude of serious play, right? I'm sensitive to the criticism. I think Alexander Bard made it in one of the videos that he did with Andrew Sweeney. I don't want to try and recreate the salons of the Ancient regime, where people sat around and talked about the important issues and problems of the day while doing nothing as the French Revolution is brewing, right? I'm not making any accusations. I'm saying that's what I don't want what we're doing to become. The meaning crisis and the meta crisis, I think, are urgent, they're exigent, they're existentially threatening, both philosophically existentially and literally existentially threatening. We don't want people who are coming to be in a salon. We want people instead who are more like I said, or like what happened around, Socrates. That practice generates stoicism as a way of life, as you know, that eventually reaches to the height of the emperor become Stoic philosopher.
Yeah. And it's so I run the Stoicism Toronto group here, yes. and I try to practice Stoicism as best as I can. And my co-founder, Daniel, he views, we were having a discussion on what is the Stoa mean, right? A Stoa is this place, not where just Stoics talk and, just geek out about Stoicism. It's a place where anyone can come to philosophize about what's most important.
Yes, exactly.
Right? Doesn't matter if you're a Roman emperor or you're a Roman slave, Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And the dialectic also gets taken up into the church, because when you see, how does Thomas Aquinas write? He writes in dialectic form, where there's question and answers and back and forth, and that gets taken up into. So these things have the potential to be fundamentally capable of fundamentally restructuring the cultural cognitive grammar of major institutions like the emperor or like the Pope, right? So that's what I'm hoping. I mean, wow, that's really hubristic, right? But that's what I want as opposed to the alternative of the aristocrats sitting in the salons discussing things endlessly.
Right. And you mentioned the meta crisis, and how I hold that is that we're faced as a species with all these existential risks that are interconnected with each other. Yeah. Whether it's the economy or the environment or AGI, and coupled with that is our inability to sense make the is and odd of what's going on.
Yes.
Right. And sort of all these sort of memetic tribes that I've been tracking through the culture.
Wonderful term, by the way. Great. Thank you for giving this.
Thank you. Whether it's the Extinction Rebellion or effective altruism or some of the reactionary tribes when they talk about the black pill, it's they're all looking at the same reality, the same meta crisis, but they're hyper-focused on one area. They're not talking to each other.
Right. So this is like what you get in children, according to Piaget. You have what's called, there's a kind of fixation. So what development often means is, opening up the number of variables that you find relevant and salient, and that's not just that's not primarily a belief thing. That's a perspectival, participatory thing. It's a developmental thing, right? Opening up the number of variables and how they're related in order to stop falling prey to a certain kind of bias. And so I'm hoping that what we can do is get people to that, right? Where there's like the way I was describing it to you. Notice there's all these. I'm trying to, in the phenomenology, I'm trying to pick out what are all the dimensions going on in dialectic, right? And how can we teach people to coordinate them so that they're like the kid that goes from centration to the adult. They can pay attention to multiple variables, like as the child is to the adult is to the sage. That's one of the the ways of understanding wisdom, and that's what I'm really interested in.
Right. And when we were talking last time, I mentioned it seems like to me you're operating in two intellectual ecologies right now. One in the academic sense, you're doing formal research,
Yep.
and then this sort of this wild west of intellectual.
I like that too, by the way. Yeah.
And in the wild west is sort of what you and I are doing this research in. The strange attractor there seems to be this authentic dialogue, and this is like the antidote to the meta crisis.
Yes. Well, I think there's deep reasons for that. So what the academic research is showing is like what are the kinds of things that actually contribute to people's a sense of meaning, and so I think what people are looking for when they're doing this. I find the term authenticity problematic, but what people are looking for when they're looking for, I'm going to use it in the title of the series, but what people are looking for is they're looking for, I would argue, they're looking for a form of discourse that brings in all of these levels, like all of these kinds of knowings, so that underneath the communication there's communing, because people need to feel a deep connection, right? And it also is flow affording if we're connecting that way, other than just connecting with the content of our beliefs. And one of the things that's predictive of how meaningful your life is how often you have flow in it, because it's the sense of being really connected, really coupled to how the world is unfolding. And I think why that's important, because I argue that the mental fog that is preventing us from really getting a grip on formulating the meta crisis, doing good problem formulation on the meta crisis, as Thomas Bjorkman calls it, right, is the meaning crisis. We're in scarcity mentality about meaning that reduces your cognitive flexibility, removes the capacity to flow, removes insight, and so it's like you get you're like the kid. You centrate and you hold on. You get into the ayat. You're trying to hold, and then you lose all of the cognitive flexibility that is necessary for reformulating and restructuring how we're going to address the meta crisis. So I think people are coming at. I think this is kind of a really good intuition that if we can't figure out how to get the self-correcting opponent processing going on again, so that we can massively, restructure, right, collective intelligence, we're not going to be able to formulate the problem in a way we need to solve. We have all the data about, like, in the sense of the data. It's like the Necker cube, where it's like a diagram, and you look at it and it's like a block, and it flips, right? All the information is there. What changes isn't the information. What changes is what's salient. What aspects come forward, what aspects recede. And we need an aspect shift on the meta crisis. And I think people have a sense that it's got to be an aspect shift coming from collective intelligence, the kind of restructuring that you and I have been talking about.
Right. And just to use the simple metaphor of the blind man and the elephant.
Yeah,
it's like
yes.
we all have our hands on the elephant, but we're not talking to each other. We're yelling at each other. So how do we get into dialogue with each other?
But if I were to understand that I'm in one spot and I therefore have a bias, this is again kids. Kids are egocentric, and what you have to do as an adult is learn that you are seeing this room differently than I am right now, and take that into consideration as I move around or as I'm talking to you. You have to do something analogous there. It's like, well, I know that I'm biased, and I know you're biased, but one of the things your bias can do is call me out of my bias.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we were talking earlier about how both of us feel kind of pulled towards this, whatever this is. And I just want to say that I'm incredibly grateful for being pulled alongside it with you, my friend.
Oh, thank you very much, my friend. Me too. I think this goes back to something primordial. I want to challenge the bullshit sort of individualism, which is different, by the way, from individual responsibility, which is a moral requirement. But the idea that we're all self-made is ridiculous, because what actually made us so able to kill it. I mean, look at us individually. We're fragile and kind of badly designed as animals. We don't have good claws. We're not particularly fast. We're standing in this way in which we're always perpetually falling, exposing our throat and and our vital organs to predation. Well, what do we have? Well, what we have is we can coordinate together, sharpen some sticks and get some dogs, and then we can kill anything on the planet. What made us so powerful was this ability to tap into collective intelligence and coordinate distributed cognition to solve problems that we can't individually solve. That's our great ability. Our adaptive advantage across speciation was our ability to coordinate together and create, distributed cognition, enact collective intelligence, and put that to achieving goals that are far out of the reach of us as individuals. There's been recent research, right, where they've taken rat brains. This sounds Orwellian, but this is happening, and they've actually linked them together electronically, and the rats are capable of solving problems that the individual rats can't solve. And there's been some recent experiments using chips linking humans. This is how distributed cognition and the power of collective intelligence is a real thing. And I think because it was our advantage across species, across speciation in evolution, we are wired to seek it out and to find it inherently valuable and deeply motivating and deeply rewarding. And so, like, I think religions were masterful at this. Like, the body of Christ, or ecclesia, which means the gathering. They were masterful at gathering people together, creating these psychotechnologies, rituals that enact and engage distributed cognition, bring collective intelligence up. And I would go so further. I think that what a lot of the religions were able to do was to take that collective intelligence and bring it into what I'm calling collective rationality. And so it's powerful for us, and it is what we need, I would argue, if we're going to bring about the restructuring, the fundamental aspect shift we need, if we're going to address the meaning crisis in such a way. That's why I use the word awakening, not solving. It's an aspect shift out of the meaning crisis, out of the way in which it's fogging our mind, so that we can get to the mental flexibility, the mental wherewithal, so that we can restructure and reformulate the meta crisis.
And then we've been talking about the sense of urgency with this project as well, because if we don't figure this out, we're going to kill ourselves. I think there's. I was talking to David the other day about this. I think there's sort of two senses of urgency. There's the existential urgency, and then there's what I would call kairotic urgency. There's a kairos here, and and kairos is there's a reason why spirit is the wind. It comes and goes as it will. Who has seen the wind? Neither you nor I, right? But what is it? When the trees are bowing down, the wind is passing by, or whatever that famous poem is. But the idea, it comes and goes as it will. Jesus says that in the Gospels too. The kairos is here. I think but we can't count on it staying. It's spiritus. It will come and go as it will. And if we don't get the spiritual sensitivity to pick up on it, we'll lose it. So there's also that urgency. And the two urgencies are not independent of each other. They accelerate and exacerbate each other.
If you liked that video, I'll be using some of these conversational techniques we just talked about this Thursday in an exclusive event for Rebel Wisdom members called The Psychodynamic is Political, the Art of Memetic Mediation. I'll be repurposing some of these techniques into a very fun and interactive session around the theme of memetic mediation, which is all about getting people from divergent political and philosophical backgrounds in conversation with each other. Check out the show notes below for details. It's this Thursday, August 27th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time.